At the company retreat, Ethan Gu arrived with his girlfriend, treating her with utmost care. Observing this, everyone couldn't help but sigh. Mr. Gu is worth millions and still does these small things for his love. Their relationship must be so deep. His girlfriend, however, looked at me with a smile. I have to thank Miss Zhang for not marrying him back then. Otherwise, I wouldn't be the one enjoying this happiness now. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, his tone indifferent. It's all in the past. Feeling the gossiping gazes of the crowd, I forced a stiff smile, my abdomen scar itching. Faintly. Yes, I don't have the same good fortune as you. Chapter 1. When my ex-boyfriend was penniless, I broke up with him. I never thought the boomerang would hit me 7 years later. He came to my company as the new CEO. At the retreat, I sat in a corner. A colleague who learned from Ethan about our past relationship half-jokingly asked, "And Zhang, why did you and Mr. Gu break up back then?" My hand holding the chopsticks paused. I instinctively looked at Ethan, who was sitting opposite, engrossed in his phone, not intending to intervene. I had to force a smile. I was young and didn't know Mr. Gu would achieve such great success. As soon as I finished speaking, I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Ethan stood up, his expression indifferent. "You guys go ahead, I need to pick someone up." After he left, my colleagues became restless. "Who do you think Mr. Gu went to pick up?" "Isn't it obvious, his girlfriend of course." The speaker looked at me with a smirk. "Anne, if you hadn't broken up with Mr. Gu back then, you might have become the CEO's wife." I remained silent. Ethan soon returned, accompanied by a beautiful woman. "Hello everyone, I'm Ethan's girlfriend, Claire Shen." "Oh, so it's Mrs. Gu." "Mrs. Gu, please have a seat." Amid the commotion, some threw gloating glances my way. Claire seemed to sense the strange atmosphere, her gaze finally landing on me. "You!" She appeared surprised, then extended her hand with a smile. "You must be in Zhang, Ethan mentioned you." I opened my mouth, only to stand up and shake her hand. "Nice to meet you. Let's eat first." Ethan pulled out a chair for her, his icy expression softened significantly. I lowered my gaze, staring at the empty bowl. "The shrimp here is delicious, try some." "But shrimp is a bit troublesome." Ethan sighed as if resignedly and began peeling shrimp for Claire. During this, someone tried to toast her, but Ethan intercepted. "Her stomach isn't well, she can't drink." Everyone sighed in admiration. Mr. Gu is worth millions and still does these small things for his wife. What a good man. Claire raised her glass, smiling at me. "We have to thank Miss Zhang for not marrying him back then. Otherwise, I wouldn't be the one enjoying this happiness now. When we get married, you must come." I numbly raised my glass, forcing a smile. "Congratulations." As the drink went down, the scar on my abdomen began to itch painfully again. Chapter 2. Why don't you explain what happened back then? On the other end of the phone, Mindy expressed her frustration. "He has a girlfriend now." I found an excuse to leave early. Snow was still falling outside. Standing at the hotel entrance, my fingers were numb from the cold. "And they seem very happy." The air fell silent. Snowflakes danced down, trampled underfoot, stained with mud. "So you're giving up? After all the effort, if it weren't for Mindy." I interrupted her, my voice dry and hoarse. Once harm is done, reasons don't matter anymore. From Ethan's perspective, I wronged him. It's okay if he hates or resents me. I'm just happy and sad at the same time. It seems he has completely moved on from me. The warm breath I exhaled blurred my vision. This snowy day reminded me of the time I broke up with Ethan. We lost contact for days. He finally found out from my roommate that I had returned to the dorm, pulled out his phone, and rushed over. Only to be met with my breakup words. Ethan, I was just playing with you. You didn't take it seriously, did you? He shook his head in disbelief, trying to hug me. Are you pathetic? I said it's over. What's the point of clinging on? At the dorm entrance, I used the harshest words to humiliate him, attracting a crowd of students. Or do you want breakup money? I took out my wallet, looking at him with disdain. Tell me, how much do you want? Ethan's face turned pale, yet he stubbornly waited downstairs all night. He was eventually taken away by an ambulance. Ethan's friend called to scold me. Anne, Ethan is in the hospital with a high fever. Do you know that? Having money makes you great? Does it give you the right to humiliate people? Hasn't he done enough for you? Anne, you'll get your comeuppance for betraying true feelings. I held the phone, smiling bitterly but calmly. All right, I'll wait for that day. The phone was immediately slammed down on the other end. The cold air seeped into my lungs. The sound of footsteps pulled me back to reality. I turned to see Ethan. Feeling awkward, I pretended nothing had happened, hanging up the phone and checking my ride's ETA, but I was caught off guard as he grabbed my arm. Ethan's gaze swept over my phone screen, a mocking smile playing on his lips. Miss Zhang, who once wouldn't settle for anything but luxury brands, now shares rides with others. My mind flashed back to years ago. The Zhang family was at its peak. I was proud and reckless, and anything I liked or wanted, as long as money could buy, I'd find a way to get. Anne, I thought you would never change. His cold words pulled me back to reality. I met Ethan's mocking eyes, my frozen lips twitching into a smile. What, Mr. Gu, planning to sponsor me? I spoke lightly, trying to seem as carefree as I used to be. Sure, 5,000 or 10,000, name your price. The smile on my lips froze completely. Ethan sneered. Too little? How about 1,000,000? The Miss Zhang of today is not what she used to be. 1,000,000 back then would only buy you a handbag. Too bad, Anne, now you're worth only a handbag. I didn't know how my hand raised and came down. But when I came to, Ethan's face bore 5 distinct red finger marks. Ethan! Claire's urgent voice and the chaotic footsteps of colleagues echoed behind me. I panicked, breaking free from his grip, and fled the scene. Chapter 3. You hit the big boss in front of all your colleagues, so now you're afraid to go to work? In the cramped apartment, Mindy scolded while handing me some pills. What were you thinking? You don't dare to reconcile, but hitting him was no problem? I swallowed the pills with water, smiling bitterly. He wanted to keep me. The scar on my abdomen itched, waves of nausea rising. I couldn't help but dry heave. Your body can't handle alcohol. Mindy patted my back. You should get checked again in a while. I closed my eyes. It's fine, no matter how many times they check, it's the same. In the shower, I looked at the hideous scar on my side. The raised flesh looked like a limp caterpillar clinging to my skin. I suddenly thought of Claire's pretty face and fair skin, gripping the towel tightly. I once had a healthy, vibrant body too. But now, this body was like a broken sack, a machine missing parts no amount of repair could fix it. The next day, I still went to work. One can face social death, but not poverty. Especially me. As soon as I reached my desk, I felt the stares around me. I pursed my lips, turned on my computer, and stared at the cluttered desktop, my mind anything but calm. Anne, come over here. Lily called me. I took a deep breath. Okay. As I walked over, I heard the mocking whispers of my colleagues. How did Anne have the guts to hit the boss? Does she still think she's Mr. Gu's girlfriend and can order people around? Ridiculous, even the real girlfriend wouldn't dare. She's in big trouble now. Inside Lily's office, I closed the door and pulled the blinds to block outside view. Lily, I know I offended the big boss. You can demote me, but please don't fire me, okay? I needed a steady income for my monthly medical expenses. Finding a new job at this time wouldn't be easy. Lily looked at me, then pulled out a contract from her drawer. Demotion is secondary, look at this first. Chapter 4. I took the contract with both hands. It was a new employment contract, the salary 5 times my current one. But before I could feel joy, I saw the job title. I couldn't help but grip the paper tightly. This is. Mr. Gu gave you 2 choices, become his personal assistant or resign. Lily looked at me with a complex expression. After a while, she walked over and spoke earnestly. Although I don't know what happened between you and Mr. Gu, this job is a good opportunity for you now. Think carefully before giving up. I'm sorry, Before I could finish, Lily interrupted. I know what you're worried about, but personal life is personal life. Work is work. You need to separate the two. She paused. Besides, your employment records indicate a serious medical condition. The medical expenses alone must be significant. Lily patted my shoulder. Young people, don't be stuck on minor emotions. I fell silent. During lunch, the hospital called to remind me of the next month's machine maintenance fee. I looked at the meager balance in my account and finally accepted the job. I had to lower my head. In the afternoon, my colleagues received the notice of my transfer to the CEO's office. Someone remarked sarcastically, "Wow, some people really have no shame, clinging to a man with a fiancé. Isn't a personal assistant just a glorified mistress? They even gave it a fancy title. Might as well stay home as a kept woman, just spread your legs and the money comes in, unlike us working hard here." My face turned pale, my fingers digging into the cardboard box. I expected this when I accepted the contract. But when it actually happened, I realized I couldn't bear it. I felt dizzy. Their words overlapped with a scene from my memory. I pushed open the long unseen door of my home barefoot, not greeted by the smiles of my parents. A pregnant young woman, my hysterical mother, and my father's impatient face. My last refuge crumbled in that moment. My face went white, and I suddenly screamed. I'm not a mistress. I'm not anyone's kept woman. My colleagues were stunned, and just when I thought my outburst had an effect, a deep male voice sounded from behind. What is all this noise? Everyone scurried back to their desks, not daring to make a sound. Seeing this, my eyes felt dry as I turned and numbly called. Mr. Gu. Ethan glanced at the box in my hands. If you're packed, come over. I followed him step by step, like a soulless puppet. Inside the CEO's office, I found my desk placed right next to Ethan's. What do you mean by this? My voice trembled slightly. Anne, since you accepted this job, why pretend? Ethan sneered. Miss Zhang is as hypocritical as ever. If you want to be kept, just say it. You don't need me to use another method. Then again, you always care about appearances. Of course, you need to keep up the facade. He walked over, towering over me with his cold gaze. Don't worry, I'll respect your preference for appearances and won't let others gossip. My mind flashed to his gentle, smiling eyes. That time I had a sudden high fever, Ethan carried me to the hospital. My face rested against his back, mumbling deliriously. Ethan, will I die? His voice was steady and calming, mixed with slight panting. Don't say such silly things. I won't let anything happen to you. Be good, we're almost at the hospital. Ethan, it hurts. Don't be scared, if it hurts, bite me. I bit into his shoulder but found I didn't even have the strength to bite. Ethan, will you always stay with me? Yes. Finally at the hospital, as I lost consciousness, I saw his gentle and determined eyes, whispering in my ear. I'll always stay with you, my dear. My stomach started to cramp and I smiled bitterly. Once, I truly wanted to be with Ethan forever, but after that incident, everything changed. Ethan seemed angered by my smile, pushing me onto the sofa. His tall body pressed down on me. I froze, buried memories of terror awakening. "Ethan, let go of me." I struggled, pushing against his chest with both hands. Ethan tore off his tie, easily binding my wrists together, locking them above my head, kissing me from my ear down. "Anne, you provoked me first. I won't let you escape. Ethan, please, I beg you, don't." My words were cut off, eyes filled with despair. His hand had touched the hideous scar. He suddenly lifted my shirt. Seeing the scar, his breath hitched, voice trembling. "Anne, what happened?" Chapter 5. I closed my eyes, my throat dry. "Ethan, let go of me." He was silent for a moment but then released the tie. I mechanically adjusted my clothes, picked up the scattered folder. "If there's nothing else, Mr. Gu, I'll leave." But Ethan grabbed my wrist tightly. "Go to the hospital." His voice was filled with barely concealed fear. "Anne, go to the hospital with me. I won't bother you at work after." Hearing this, a wild, destructive urge surged within me. Might as well let Ethan know. Why should I be the only one drowning in pain? After so many years, someone else should accompany me into the abyss. But if I told him now why I humiliated him to make him leave back then, what would be the point? I forced a smile, swallowing the bitterness. "Mr. Gu, it's just a scar from a minor surgery. No need to make a fuss." Ethan was silent for a moment. "Mr. Gu, if there's nothing else, I'll return to work." I broke free from his grip and headed for the door. "Anne, are you really okay?" My hand rested on the cold doorknob. "Of course, thank you for your concern, Mr. Gu." Chapter 6. "Anne, your condition has worsened again." In the hospital, I listened to Dr. Zhu's diagnosis, feeling surprisingly calm. As if I had anticipated this result. "I think you need rest." Dr. Zhu set down the psychological report. "Continuing like this, you'll destroy yourself sooner or later." I smiled helplessly, looking no different from a normal person. "Dr. Zhu, if I rest, who will pay for my mom's intensive care unit fees?" Dr. Zhu was silent for a long time, then sighed deeply. 7 years ago, I narrowly escaped death and returned home, only to find my father's mistress pregnant, forcing her way in. Seeing me, the woman's face turned pale, arousing the suspicion of the officer who brought me home. After interrogation, it was revealed she had hired people to kidnap me to coerce my mom. The woman was imprisoned, my father absconded with the money. My mother couldn't handle the blow and attempted to end her life, resulting in her vegetative state. And I, after enduring a series of traumatic events, teetered on the brink of insanity, repeatedly failing psychological evaluations, my deteriorating body weakening day by day. If it weren't for my mom barely hanging on in that hospital bed, if it weren't for the debt I owed Mindy, I would have ended it all without hesitation, embracing death. When I first started seeing Dr. Zhu, he said I needed someone to look after me. Mindy also urged me to tell Ethan the truth, saying it would be better to face it together than alone. I hugged my knees, sitting on the bed, devoid of life. So, should I drag an innocent person into this abyss too? Just the hospital bills for me and my mom were astronomical. Ethan was about to study abroad, his life was just beginning. Should I make him give up everything to live a life as bleak as mine? Mindy fell silent. I buried my head in my knees, a selfish thought unspoken. I wanted to remain in Ethan's memory as the vibrant Anne he once knew, even if it meant he would hate me for humiliating him. As long as Ethan remembered the old Anne, she would still be alive. Chapter 7. Returning to the office on Monday, the lively discussions halted as soon as I appeared. I pretended nothing had happened and sat down at my desk. Someone deliberately raised their voice. "Some people's skin is really thick, clinging to a man who is about to get engaged. Claire is both beautiful and gentle. What does she see in this homewrecker? A vixen knows how to seduce. The proper wife wouldn't stoop so low." I turned a deaf ear. Just as I opened my computer, a news alert popped up in the lower left corner. Business tycoon Ethan Gu announces engagement today. The accompanying photo was of Ethan and Claire. Suppressing the pain in my chest, I closed the news, opening my email instead. There was a notification in my inbox. Reading HR's response, I felt a wave of relief. Luckily, I passed the interview for this company. Since that dinner, I had been job hunting. Though it took time and I had little savings, I couldn't let the hospital fees lapse, so I stayed on. Now, with Ethan getting engaged and a new job lined up, albeit with less pay, it was time to leave. I sent my resignation letter to HR. Shortly after, HR called. Anne, I can't approve your resignation. You need to speak directly with Mr. Gu. I wasn't surprised. After thanking them, I printed my resignation letter and knocked on Ethan's office door. You want to resign? HR must have informed Ethan. I nodded, placing the resignation letter on his desk with both hands. Mr. Gu, I feel I'm not capable enough for this job. Not capable? Ethan picked up the resignation letter, sneering as he tore it apart. Anne, whether you're capable is for me to decide, not you. He spoke coldly. Your resignation is rejected. Go back to work. I clenched my fists, taking a deep breath, ready to lay it all out. Ethan, you're about to get married. He paused, his tone casual. So what? Claire won't mind. But I mind. I stared at him. Ethan, I won't be the person who wrecks someone else's family. Ethan seemed to hear a joke. He stood up, looking down at me arrogantly. You think too highly of yourself, Anne. You can't wreck my family. Keeping you around is like having a pet. A pet can't ruin my family. But I'm a person, not a pet. You have no right to keep me from resigning. I spoke. Ethan, what will it take for you to let me go? He looked at me, then fetched several bottles of alcohol and 2 glasses from behind him. Drink all of these, and I'll let you go. Are you serious? Yes. I bit my lip, opened a bottle, and drank straight from it. The bitter liquid burned my throat. After finishing a bottle, I felt dizzy. As I lost consciousness, I heard Ethan's voice. Greedy little cat. Chapter 8. Ethan locked me up. I didn't know how he managed to bypass company security and everyone else to bring me back to his villa. When I woke up, I was in an unfamiliar room, my clothes changed, my phone confiscated, the door locked, and windows barred. I had no way out. I tried smashing things and going on a hunger strike. The former resulted in someone silently cleaning up the broken pieces, while the latter made Ethan come to watch me eat. As long as you eat properly, I'll let you go to the garden. The garden is full of red roses, very beautiful. You'll like it. Ethan controlled every aspect of my life. Gradually, I stopped resisting. He took this as my submission. He treated me better and better. Except for being unable to leave or communicate with the outside world, I could do anything. I saw him and Claire attending a banquet on TV, the media called them a match made in heaven. The black screen reflected my face. Gaunt and unfamiliar. I stared at that face, then went to the bathroom. After being confined for 3 months, the hospital fees I had paid were exhausted. Unable to reach me, the hospital would disconnect the machines keeping my mom alive. I lay in the bathtub, holding a small shard of porcelain I had hidden earlier, and gently sliced my wrist. The real Anne died 7 years ago. Along with my mother who jumped from the building. Chapter 9. Ethan rushed back from the banquet. Anne's recent compliance had put him at ease. He thought that once he established himself domestically and ended his partnership with Claire, he would give Anne a grand wedding. They would have a happy ending. A smile crept onto his face. On the way back, Ethan stopped at a flower shop and bought a bouquet of red roses. He remembered Anne's favorite flowers during school were red roses. The lively girl stood in the sunlight, holding a bouquet of roses, smiling brightly at him. Ethan, will you love me forever? Ethan remembered he didn't say it out loud but silently vowed 100 times in his heart. Ethan will always love Anne. But suddenly, the red roses turned into a shower of money, the the girl's bright smile replaced by mockery. "Ethan, I was just playing with you. You didn't take it seriously, did you? Weren't you with me for money? Here it is. Is this enough?" Ethan felt a dull pain in his chest, instinctively clenching his fists. He loved Anne and he hated her. He wanted to return all the humiliation he had suffered, so he never stopped the rumors in the company, even fueling them. But Ethan never imagined that after the Zhang family fell, Anne would end up in such a state and still refuse to bow her head. Anne wanted to escape. He wouldn't allow it. Upstairs was silent. The room was dark. Ethan stood at the door for a long time, adjusting his expression before entering. He wouldn't tell Anne the roses were for her, only that Claire didn't want them, so he brought them back. Opening the door, the bed was empty. But the bathroom light was on. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, but the next second, a smell of blood wafted over, his face changed. He yanked open the bathroom door. Blood was everywhere. The roses fell, petals stained with blood. Ethan rushed Anne to the hospital, his whole body trembling. His hands and clothes were covered in blood. He couldn't understand why Anne would do this, just because he locked her up. Ethan's mind flashed to the hideous scar on Anne's side. He had asked about it once. She only said it was a minor surgery. But what kind of minor surgery leaves such a terrible, glaring scar? For some reason, Ethan felt a panic, as if something was slipping out of his control. He frantically searched for Anne's phone. It had been off for months, out of battery. Ethan got a charger, plugging it in, and waited impatiently until the screen finally lit up. Messages flooded in. He scrolled through, reading them one by one. There were messages from Mindy, someone labeled Dr. Zhu, and numerous payment reminders from the hospital. Ethan focused on the messages from Dr. Zhu. When are you coming for a follow-up? Remember to take your medication. Anne, are you okay? Why aren't you replying? I know you're avoiding this, but Anne, you can't go on like this. You need to find a new emotional anchor otherwise. The rest was cut off. Ethan felt like he was going mad. What did this mean? Why did Anne need medication? What was wrong with her? What did they mean by a new emotional anchor? Trembling, he dialed the only number he recognized from the messages. It was answered quickly. Hello, Mindy. Tell me, what happened to Anne? Ethan knew Mindy was Anne's best friend, but since their breakup 7 years ago, he hadn't contacted her. He never thought their next contact would be like this. Ethan? Mindy immediately recognized him, her voice filled with anger. No wonder I couldn't reach Anne. Did you take her? Tell me first, what happened to Anne? Ethan shouted. Mindy was silent for a moment, a bad feeling rising in her. Did something happen to Anne? Did she try to end it? Her voice trembled. Ethan closed his eyes and told her the hospital address. Chapter 10. Outside the emergency room, Mindy arrived quickly, slapping Ethan as soon as she saw him. You bastard! Ethan, agitated, grabbed her wrist. Explain clearly. Mindy, eyes red with anger, glared at him. You monster! You locked her up. Do you know how hard Anne struggled just to barely keep going, and you? What happened to Anne? Ethan learned the whole truth from Mindy. 7 years ago, they lost contact for 3 days. Because Anne had messaged saying her family agreed to let her study abroad, Ethan didn't think much, assuming she was dealing with her parents and had her phone taken away. But Mindy said what? Anne was kidnapped? This can't be. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot, on the verge of madness. Mindy coldly looked at him. Anne was kidnapped by thugs hired by her father's mistress. Not only did they abuse her, but they also took one of her kidneys. When the police found her, they were shocked by her condition. Have you seen the scar on her side? Didn't you question it? Ethan stood there numb. Mindy continued. Do you know why Anne broke up with you? Because her mother couldn't handle the blow and attempted to end her life, only to survive in a vegetative state. Her father absconded with the money. Anne was already struggling with severe psychological issues. She didn't want to drag you down. Anne played that cruel act at school to drive you away. Ethan, I sometimes doubt if you ever truly loved Anne. If you did, why didn't you trust her? Why didn't you notice her abnormality back then? Mindy's questions dragged Ethan back to that snowy breakup day. He had been hospitalized with a fever. Hearing Anne wanted to break up, he pulled out his .4 and rushed to school. Anne's words had cut deep, but how did he not notice her frail body and pale face? Ethan staggered, almost collapsing. Mindy, not satisfied, pressed on. Do you know why Anne tried to end it? Because you locked her up. The hospital couldn't reach her and would stop the machines keeping her mom alive. With her mom gone, Anne's last tether snapped. Anne didn't survive. She had cut her wrist with determination, arriving at the hospital too late. Learning the truth broke Ethan. The doctor's announcement of Anne's death shattered his last hope. After arranging Anne's funeral with Mindy, Ethan disappeared. No one knew where he went. The next time Mindy heard about Ethan, it was on the news. A man disguised himself, sneaked into a prison, and stabbed 4 inmates over 100 times, killed on the spot by the police. Mindy recognized the names of those inmates. 3 were the kidnappers, and 1 was Anne's father's mistress. They were sentenced to life, but Ethan found it insufficient. He went in and finished them off, using his life to avenge Anne. But Mindy found it unimportant. Anne and Ethan, in death, found a kind of release. She looked at the red roses swaying in the wind outside the window. Anne would live well in another world.